Hello, this is Maximo Bottaro from Rainforests Now. In this presentation, we'll talk about how a bacteria associated with rainforests may be causing it to rain on the forests themselves. This topic is called bioprecipitation, the concept that biological material is causing rainfall. This is an idea that has rapidly been gaining traction in the scientific field for about 10 years. Although it's been known for around 30 years. And the idea is that, on the global scale, that some of the rainfall that we get on the land is actually biologically caused, and this would have big implications for rainforest conservationists and other conservationists who are trying to protect forests, as the loss of forest might mean the loss of rainfall. The general premise is that biological material, if it's small enough, will naturally float up into the clouds. Water will collect around it, and when water collects around it, it'll bunch onto other water droplets. These are called hydrogen bonds, and large droplets will form around these small organic particles. When those large droplets fall, they become heavy and fall from the sky. That's rainfall. Now, specifically what we want to talk about is that there are also organisms that have evolved a mechanism to actively form water droplets around their bodies. Now they would be more effective at making rainfall than a regular aerosol. And it's not just biological particles that cause rainfall. Dust, soot, pollen, salts, there's all sorts of different things that actually ice nucleate. This means to become the center for water to form around so that it can fall from the sky. Here's a quote from Tom Bell at NASA, making this point very clear. Water vapor doesn't ordinarily spontaneously condense into droplets to form clouds. It needs dirt to form around. All rain needs aerosols to form. Therefore, if there is really pure water in the atmosphere, you can see clouds going by that could be minus 40 degrees and they're still not dropping out of the sky. Now, what this presentation will not do is it will not tell you that everything we already know about climatology and hydrology are wrong. We're not going to do that. What we are going to say is that within what we see happening on the global scale, there is a great body of evidence that says it's more complicated and biology is affecting the overall precipitation patterns on the planet. And what we've done here is we've produced a meta-analysis. This means that we've looked at science fields that normally don't talk to each other, and we found some extremely interesting things to suggest that bioprecipitation is real. Here are the references that are used actively in this presentation. They're not sorted in any particular way. There's about 81 of them here. And feel free to look these up yourself to check any of the information that we've shared. Now, up on the left, you see 0 to 9. That's the amount of publications per year. And across the bottom, you can see the publication year. Back in 1982, there was 2 publications on the topic of bioprecipitation, and then 1 publication every couple of years until about 2006. And then the topic heats up, and there has been a great deal of legitimate scientific interest in this topic in the last 10 years. So why haven't you heard about this? Because you're about to. Now, throughout this, we're going to show you actual snippets from research papers on the topic. In this one, they were showing that almost all, 85%, of ice nucleating material was biological, and that at the center of hailstones, they were finding a specific bacteria that ice nucleates as the instigator of the whole hailstone. Here we see that ice-making bacteria, when they're in clouds, rapidly fall out of the cloud, taking water with them, which means that they're more efficient at setting ice and escaping the cloud than normal bacteria. And the same author later found this is in fact true, that other bacteria do travel in clouds, but the type that can make their own ice tend to travel a shorter leg in the cloud and then pull some rain out of the cloud and fall out of it. Additional to this, snow samples from around the world have been finding the same thing. Bioaerosols, flying, floating biological material in the center of 70 to 100% of snow samples. What about in the tropical areas? Papers from the Amazon are saying very interesting things, that the majority of ice nucleators in the humid tropical jungle that set rainfall are actually biological, and that the majority could be biological. And interestingly, the very type of bacteria we're going to talk about inhabited almost 80% of almost 100 plant species. Now, interestingly, the kind of bacteria we're going to talk about occupied almost 80% of 95 plant species. And here it says INA. This refers to ice nucleating active, as in making ice. Now, pretty quickly upon discovering this topic, you come across Snowmax. Snowmax is a commercial product. It's a very expensive product, and it's sold for about $2,000 a box. It is Pseudomonas syringae, which I'll just call Pseudomonas for the rest of this presentation. This is what a bag of it looks like. It weighs about 300 grams, and they mix it with water and they put it in these snow machines that spray water with like a big fan. They spray water over the ski resort, and that sets ice on the slopes. Now, how powerful is this Pseudomonas? Well, 920 micrograms are enough in a litre of water to make it turn to ice. That's how powerful this stuff is. And if you look at what Dr. Sands says about it, Dr. Sands has been researching the topic for 30 years. He's saying that from a single Pseudomonas individual, 1,000 snowflakes could be catalyzed. So a tiny amount of this bacteria can set off a lot of water to set to ice. And keep that in mind for later. This is how it does it. That's the INAZ protein on the Pseudomonas. It's an electrically charged coil, and it's the right size to stick water molecules to it. So how it sticks them is with alternating positive and negative electrical charges along the length of it. Water molecules are negatively and positively charged on a polar basis, so then they basically are attracted into position. Now, if this was the case, that the Pseudomonas are making ice with a protein on their body, then you should be able to kill that protein. So some people did that, and they stopped effectively ice nucleating above -10. Now remember, everything you know about water freezing into ice at ground level on the Earth is not particularly relevant to cloud processes, but we won't go into the science. What we will say is that in the clouds, water doesn't set to ice all by itself, and it can be floating around at -40 degrees centigrade. They disabled the protein, it stopped ice nucleating, pretty clear that it was doing it. This is a Nature publication, by the way. This isn't some fringe article. And they found that yes, these organisms can set ice at temperatures warmer than any other naturally occurring particle. That's why it's $2,000 a box, sold to ski resorts, and it's real and it's everywhere. And of course, the magic of how it does it is the perfect arrangement of H2O molecules, and heat is siphoned away from them. And as you know, when you cool water, what does it do? It turns to ice. So it arranges the water molecules into place, siphons heat away, stabilizes them so their molecules aren't vibrating so much, and they stick to ice and they set off a chain reaction with other molecules. Seeing this happening in the flesh is a bit of a game changer. What I'm going to show you here is a scientist with a pipetta. This yellow tip should be a P100 pipetta. And this over here is about a litre of very cold water that, by the way, is very clean to do this experiment. It has to be perfectly clean. So watch this. He's going to take about 2 microliters of extract of a Pseudomonas syringae. He's going to add it to this cold water. Now watch the drops come down yourself. 1, 2, solid ice. I don't think we even needed the second drop. That's how powerful Pseudomonas is. And there's many videos from universities around the world that do little experiments with their students to show this. So this is the species in question, the Pseudomonas syringae. This is what it looks like. You can see it's flagellated, and that's on a leaf, that image, and you can see the leaf stroma there. There's many species of Pseudomonas syringae. Almost none of them are what we're talking about. They're all plant pathogens and plant epiphytes. We're talking about one branch of this group that make ice. They are globally distributed. As I said, there's many lifestyle habits, and they can make water vapor into ice at higher temperatures than would normally happen in the clouds. And it's been suggested that they evolved this mechanism to disperse themselves because they live on plants, then they fly up into the atmosphere, then they want to grab the cloud and make it rain back down on the forest again or on a nearby forest. And that way they would cover the earth in a cycle. So many varieties, they live on just about everything that you eat. Some of them do harm, some of them don't, but the type that make ice, they're found in the atmosphere and all around the world. Now, they're not the only organism that makes ice on their bodies. The Owinias, the Pantoeas, the Xanthomonas, they all do it as well. But if you look at this genetic map, these all have common ancestry, which is very compelling, to suggest that there's an ancient and long-standing habit of organisms that fly up into the atmosphere, set rain, and have a relationship with the forest below. If you want to follow that relationship back even further, the pseudomonads are directly related at the taxonomic level to the marinobacters. These guys live in the ocean, they're salt tolerant, and they go back even further to be related to Oceanospirilla. Now, what that's telling you is that this bacteria has evolved from an ocean ancestor, and its family has come straight from that. So consider that for later. Now, these are all things you've seen in your fridge when you go on holidays. All of these things are killed by Pseudomonas syringae, which once again, if this lives on a plant and it kills all the other pathogens, it's likely to be in a symbiosis with the plants, supporting the idea that they work together with forests. And it's even sold to as a way of preserving and protecting crops, so the products of the crop. Now, this next point is very hard to swallow if you haven't heard it before, but it's absolutely not contested amongst the literature sources. The Pseudomonas is actually the primary cause of frost damage in the world, and this is well known to be the cause. But you'll see in lots of articles people just say, "Oh, frost did this much damage," but nobody wants to talk about bacteria. Therefore, it's sort of skipped public interest in a way. But it is found on the plants as the cause of the bursting cells and damage to the plants and the ice damage to the plants, and it's very abundant on our crops compared to bare land because it obviously lives on plants and breeds on them. Now, it's so clear that this is a primary source of frost damage that there are stupendous amounts of money being spent to try and find a way to stop it. However, if it's distributing itself through the atmosphere, it's unlikely that this sort of approach is going to work. And this sort of approach that you see here, grants to try and find ways to disable the bacteria, this is exactly what we mean when we say that this meta-analysis showed that many different types of scientists are interested in Pseudomonas, but that they don't talk to each other. Let's look at the aerosolization capacity of the bacterium. They can float up into the atmosphere at up to 30 square meters per second above plant canopies. That was discovered over alfalfa crops. Now, obviously, anything that aerosolizes is going to do it better in hot, wet air, i.e. the forest. And the type that ice nucleate have been found far more often in the atmosphere than the other types of Pseudomonas syringae. So we're just talking about the ice nucleating kind, and they're happier in wetter climates and hotter climates. They're more active in tropical type clouds, the warm clouds. Now, this is what's really interesting. The higher the humidity, the more they breed. The tropical and subtropical forests are where one should expect the greatest impact from these bacteria to be. Now, are they also in the atmosphere? There's some very interesting confused scientific papers out there saying things like this. Clouds can be very, very cold, but then they won't set to ice because there's no ice nucleators present. But then much warmer clouds can be gushing out ice and snow. Read the bottom quote there. These clouds obviously contain something that efficiently nucleates ice at much warmer temperatures. Microbe magazine did a collaborative study on this, and they found that when they looked at snow and ice samples, every single individual Pseudomonas that they put under the microscope was an ice nucleating type. They found lots of them in the near surface of the Earth and the troposphere, which is the lowest part of the atmosphere, and up to 10,000 of these guys per cubic meter of cloud material, which keep that in mind for later. And of course they found them everywhere, but more of them in moist, humid conditions. Now, it's been studied in artificial cloud experiments, and they found, yes, Pseudomonas syringae absolutely sets ice in artificial clouds. And another artificial cloud experiment, they even suggested that they're likely to be an instigator in triggering lightning because they're electrically charged. And even more strange stuff was said here, which is that because of the electrical activity in the atmosphere and in clouds, that these bacteria were gaining in adaptive potential before coming back to the Earth. Now, I did find 3 papers that doubted the phenomena entirely, and here's an example of one where I don't believe that the scientists working in different parts of this field are communicating. Have a look at this. Cirrus cloud formation being an unlikely scenario where biological particles are causing rain. Well, that's almost minus 25 degrees, and where I suggested to you that it's been studied that they're effective is right up here between maybe 6,000 and 8,000 or 9,000 feet, much warmer. So if you're finding pseudomonas all the way up in the cirrus clouds above 20,000 feet, you should very much expect that they're not having an effect because they failed to have it much lower down before they got up there. So there you go up the top there, the cirrus cloud's way up high. However, they have found pseudomonas travelling in ice crystals above 20,000 feet. And another scientist out there has also said, in disagreement with this paper, that yes, they can still induce ice formation up there. Now, how would they make ice formation? How would they work in precipitation? And if there's only 10,000 of them per cubic meter of cloud or whatever, how are they going to have an impact? Well, what's precipitation? It's where droplets coalesce by bumping into each other, and as the water droplets bump into each other, the hydrogen, remember it's dipolar, it's charged, the hydrogen sticks together like when you push 2 droplets together on a table and make a bigger one. What does this look like in the context of pseudomonas? Here you can see an interpretation of water molecules as gas. So they're in their warm gas form, they're spinning around in the atmosphere, and at the top pseudomonas has risen to about 6,000 feet in this example. As they rise, it's getting colder as you get further off the ground, and they're colliding with water molecules that are sticking to them. When enough water molecules stick to a pseudomonas because of its electrically charged proteins on its body, it will break the air resistance barrier and start to fall. Now imagine a snowball falling down a hill. As it falls, it's going to bump into more water vapor molecules and they're going to stick. So now it's getting bigger. Now air resistance pulls a second trick. Now air resistance is going to split them into smaller droplets. And now you'll notice every second droplet has a pseudomonas in it. And it falls and snowballs and falls and snowballs. And just after this happening a couple of times, you now have a serious amount of rainfall with a small amount of bacteria in the rainfall, if you look at the small droplets at the bottom being the product. Now imagine how many times this process could happen in the body of an enormous cloud sitting in the sky. Therefore, what I'm suggesting is that a small amount of effective ice nucleating pseudomonas, which has been tested in labs and proven to work and used in ski resorts and is very expensive and lives on the trees all around the world, if a small amount of it gets up into the atmosphere and gets cool, sets water, starts to fall, before you know it, you'll have a huge amount of rainfall with a very small amount of pseudomonas in the rainfall. However, I've just suggested that we should be looking for a small amount of this bacteria, but that's not what's found. What's found is tons of it. So Watarangi and their team were working in Sumatra, and they found that up to 20% of all the bacteria in the rainwater were ice nucleators. This is a very big signal that this phenomena is real. Now, how would this affect orographic updraft? Let's just look at the science of it again. It's when you can make precipitation when moist air is lifted up against a mountain range or an obstructing body that pushes the air up higher, it gets cold, and then all that vapor sets into ice and falls. So this is what it looks like in a textbook. This is what the moist air does, and it rains on that hill. This happens all around the world. What we're suggesting is one specific example. So imagine the hot tropical ocean water evaporating, it rises up against a hillside, there's pseudomonas living in all the trees there, they get swept up into the cloud, and then they are what set the cloud to fall or assist that happening at lower altitude. Another paper from the Amazon was showing that when air travels over lots of forest, it can bring even more than twice as much the amount of rainfall as if it moved over land. Now this is easy to put down to, there's more water evaporating off the forest than there is over land. But there could be more to it, and I'll show you why. Look at this paper here, talking about lowland deforestation. Here they were saying that when you deforest the lowland, less cloud and fog will set in the montane regions above it. And it's not just that. The clouds that form on the mountains don't form until they get higher up the mountain. What they projected was that if you continue to destroy the forest down low, the clouds will continue to rise and be thinner by a lot. So in this example, the clouds would go up by a further 400 feet. And what could be causing that? This is what could be causing that. Tropical example, the water evaporates, but now we've deforested the land, so there's less pseudomonas. So as that moist air is rising up and cooling against the mountain body, there's less pseudomonas in the cloud gets higher, and the cloud gets further, and this is supported by the evidence, which is that we could actually see clouds that are escaping their normal place of rainfall, and we could see ecosystems that we've damaged begin to collapse because they're not receiving the regular rainfall that has sustained them. How would this work in this tropical environment in the warm rain process? Well, warm rain is pretty similar to ice rain. The main difference is ice rain can form easier because small droplets that condense into hard frozen ice are heavy enough per area, weight for size, so they'll fall easily. The main difference with warm rain is the water droplets require more water in the air and more updraft to sustain enough collision to coalesce. So it's basically saying if enough water droplets bang together in the air, they'll make a giant cloud condensation nucleus. So it's basically a giant droplet of water that is heavy enough to fall out of the sky without turning to ice. Now, not surprisingly, these happen in low to mid-level clouds down where? At 6,000 to 7,000 feet. And this is a serious part of tropical rainfall. Other people would say it's the primary altitude of tropical rainfall. So warm rain doesn't set to ice, happens at just the altitude where Pseudomonas syringae is meant to be effective at nucleating, said earlier. Now, another research paper again saying the dominant mechanism for tropical rainfall would be biological, and doing so through warm rain. How would this work with Pseudomonas? So, in this image, you've got the regular evaporation of the land and transpiration of the trees. So with transpiration, trees also kick out water from their leaves, not just oxygen. And what you see there is the water molecules rising, but also, as we know, the Pseudomonas syringae aerosolizing. And when this gets up, it'll form the evapotranspiration cloud that we're familiar with from textbooks. But then what happens? Well, the sun's radiation hits that cloud, doesn't it? So that cloud's first going to expand because the gas molecules inside it are going to become more excited and push around further. And this is going to get the water molecules and the Pseudomonas bumping into each other a lot faster. And then that warmed cloud is also going to rise, and now you're going to have these giant cloud condensation nuclei that have formed as the water is gathered around the Pseudomonas by all that collision, and it rains on the forest. Now from this example, you can see how they say the same water rains on the Amazon 5 or 6 times. Here's another phenomena that's very interesting. After you cut down a forest, there's more rainfall for a while, and then it dries out significantly. Found 5 papers that said this, and let's look into it a bit more on a theoretical basis. So you have the radiation of the sun beating down on this cleared forest. There's biological processes active in the degrading land, and we're now evaporating off all of this water. So the land's absorbing all this radiation, it's being re-emitted as infrared, now we're losing water, and we have this jet of warm air rising off the forest. This will create convection, and what will the convection bring from the forest around it? Aerosolized Pseudomonas, which are going to end up in the cloud. But something else is going to happen as well. Regularly what happens in forests is water percolates down through the soil. So what's going to happen here is that moist soil from the surrounding forest is going to percolate down and infiltrate into the clearing. This is going to further drain the resources of the forest, and it creates a sort of continuous open wound for the forest. This is one of the reasons why forest fragmentation is so incredibly destructive, because this open wound is constantly leaking moisture out of cleared tracks and desiccating all the surrounding forest, which is a fact. The surrounding forests desiccate. And the result being, of course, that pseudomonas find their way into the clouds, they produce water nuclei, and what do we know they do? They set rain at low altitude before the cloud can escape. Thus, the cloud fall is happening right where it started and not happening elsewhere. Now, are these things really found all around the world? And the answer is absolutely. From Antarctica to the Pyrenees, the Yukon and Louisiana, the French Alps. This is just one research paper that found pseudomonas all over the planet, and another found them in Antarctica. They're absolutely found everywhere. Now, if they're found everywhere, they distribute themselves through the air, and I showed you much earlier that they're related to halophiles from the sea. Then look again at this map here. This is a heat map of the world's oceans, the red and the maroon being the hottest parts of the world's sea. Now, what you can see when you think about this is that there has been an evolutionary opportunity for a very long time for a halophile relative from the ocean to evaporate up into the atmosphere and be able to take advantage of a random mutation that would allow it to charge with a simple molecular change, charge its body surface, set ice, and fall from the sky. And that would put it in position to have some degree of control over where it lands. Therefore, a bacteria that's evolved out of the ocean alongside plants could have helped plants colonize the land and could be bringing rainfall to them and living on them and coming down in the rain from forest to forest. So oceans cover 71% of the earth, yet we expect them to take 71% of the rainwater, but no, the ocean smells strongly, and it smells strongly because of all the aerosols that it contains. And these aerosols help the ocean to collect almost 80% of all the world's rainwater. So here would be an issue. If bacteria associated with the forest are causing rainfall on the land, and we continue to cut down the forest, we lose the host trees for the bacteria, there's less of them going up into the atmosphere, grabbing the rain and making it fall in the forest. Where's the water going to go? Well, the answer is, if this is real, more water will be landing on the ocean than on the land, and will continue to dry out the earth as we've been seeing is happening in the last 30 or so years. And from a textbook perspective, this is how the Earth's weather systems work. Now, this is valuable, but it's also not valuable on another level. So here we see the Earth broken up into 30-degree zones and how weather circulates. But let's look at what it actually looks like for an insight into what might be happening. What you'll see is a consistent band of precipitation running across the tropics. This is all being distributed by the Coriolis effect that distributes weather systems around the planet. Now, the smallest of the three of the world's forests, which would be around Papua, Indonesia and whatnot, these are the three biggest rainforests. You'll see that water travels westward over the Congo, which then travels westward over the biggest forest, which is the Amazon. But from there it travels diagonally off. That's where the textbook definition doesn't really show you what's happening. Water from the Amazon goes up over the US and down over South Africa and Australia, and just continue to watch these patterns and see where that water is going. This global distribution system of water is primarily based on evaporating tropical water from the equator. And once again, imagine a bacteria that is distributing itself and traveling through the world's weather systems this way and helping to increase rainfall on the terrestrial forests using this existing system of distribution as established by the Coriolis effect of the spinning Earth. Let's look at a bit of evidence to suggest this theory is correct. Here's a paper that studied Pseudomonas as a plant pathogen in Japan and the US, but they collected their samples 14 years apart, and they found that they were as genetically related as if they'd been collected from the same spot. But this is bacteria, these aren't human beings. 14 years apart is 0 in genetic difference between humans, but between bacteria, you're talking about tens of thousands of generations. That's like saying that an Asian and an African would be genetically homogeneous. It's completely not the case. So something very odd is happening here. and I'll show you an example of what it could be. Here's precipitation coming from Japan, across the ocean, and landing at the sample site in the US for the bacteria. The other thing that was found, supporting the idea that they've been distributing themselves through the weather systems for a long time, is that at the genome level, the pseudomonas appears to have maintained a strong population size, and this research paper was unable to clearly identify how this cohesion was maintained over such distance, suggesting simply that there's something outside of its genome maintaining the cohesion of the species. Now, can they travel across the planet? Well, Amato's team discovered absolutely they can, for thousands of kilometers, depending on the conditions. So how did this get missed? Well, it kind of hasn't been missed. There's some very top tier scientific articles and journals on this topic saying that this is real, but somehow it's missed the mainstream media. And the reason for that is also at the fault of science, where agricultural scientists, plant pathogenists, biologists, ecologists, cloud physicists, and climate change scientists have been busy working together somewhat, but mostly not working together. And when they do, the funding has been very clearly spent on climate change for the last 15 or 20 years. This has taken up our time, and so it should, but the result being the phenomena of bioprecipitation has been somewhat ignored. So what we have here is an opportunity for conservation. This is an image of the Pithegophagor, the ape eater from the Philippines. Sometimes a great ambassador is all that's required to encourage people to support conservation efforts. However, sometimes that means nothing. And what do we normally say to convince people that conservation is important? Well, the forests give us oxygen and water and medicine, and they stabilise the climate, and there's all these endangered species we need to protect, and it's biodiverse and it's adaptable. Well, the unfortunate reality is that there's many people that don't care about one thing on that list, or believe that the forest is essential for it, or that it's threatened. But everybody cares about this. Terrestrial rain seeding, that the land could become dry, that the crops could dry up, and that our way of life would be threatened because we hadn't looked after the natural processes of the earth that have been developing for hundreds of millions of years. And on top of all that, the environmental scene has become clogged with arguments about climate change. And what we need is a new form of outreach that is true and beautiful and interesting and relates to everybody, to shift us into a new gear of discussion around conservation. Here's the idea in a nutshell. In the beginning, great heat from the tropical sun evaporates much of the world's fresh water from equatorial seas. Adjacent tropical rainforests, with their enormous biomass, warmth and wetness, are large-scale hosts for water-loving plant bacteria. The tropical atmosphere is brimming with these bacteria and water vapour. This catalyses rainfall on land from weather systems that might otherwise dispose of their fresh water over the oceans. As the Earth weather systems move over the planet, a portion of their water purse is taken. Rainfall has been acquired for the bacterial host forests, and together they thrive. In this way, rainforests can call the rain. This increases rainfall not only on the rainforest, but also on adjacent forests and lands up to hundreds of miles away. When water evaporates from those secondary areas, they are caught by local airborne bacteria to fall again on their host forests or on adjacent forests, tertiary forests, and so on. This living system handballs fresh water from the water magnetising rainforests at the equator down their successive chains of forests to the Earth's poles. In the end, even in Antarctica and the Arctic, smaller quantities of these bacteria can be found at the centre of snowflakes. What are the implications of this? First, if they're doing what I showed you earlier they were doing, which is making rain fall on the same forest many times, we could lose water recycling, which would reduce the biomass of the world's forests. Now, further, if they live off the forest and we destroy the forest, then they won't be able to set rain, which will create a feedback effect of desiccating the earth. Now, additionally, if they're responsible for setting rain over forest, and we destroy some of the forest, we might see an unpredictable redirection of cloud mass, and rainfall could start to go where it's not meant to. which to some extent seems to already be happening. This would generally mean more rainfall over the ocean, which already has its own aerosols, biological and non-biological, and we would see increased crop failure, food and water security risks for all of us. So what's the next step for bioprecipitation and pseudomonas? Well, first it needs more research and it needs media outreach. It needs to be quantified. We need to sample it in the forest, in the air, increase collaboration. We need to do rainfall seeding experiments and publish it. We need to interview the scientists already working on it, many of which are in India. Document and present this to people and attract new interest to the topic. And not just this topic, it will attract new interest to conservation. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. And to reaffirm anything you've seen here, please look at the reference list presented early in the presentation.